Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I'm broadcasting tonight right at just about midnight here on the East Coast. I saw some interesting information and I wanted to share this with you. Uh, this particular title of this video is called The Globalists, the Power Elite. This particular work was written by Dr. Dennis L. Cuddy. It's a PhD in history at the University of North Carolina. So we're going to go into this part here, and I'm going to try to share some things important here for you to share with you. I hope everyone's well today. Uh, Many of the men mentioned below by Dr. Cuddy saw nothing wrong with killing a large number of people if that would advance their cause. Does that sentence fit in what we see today in Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Nigeria, etc., Ukraine? Could be. John Dewey viewed the brutality of the Bolsheviks as a social experiment. This is the guy who's considered the father of the modern education, John Dewey, also. Okay? So he sees that Bolshevikism, which is communism, is a social experiment. In other words, this experiment not in the lab per se, but this experiment on people. In other words, kill them. If you don't like them, what they believe, get rid of them. They're a hassle to deal with, you see. And H.G. Wells was unconcerned that countless people will hate the New World Order and will die protecting against it. Interesting quotes here. Elsewhere, he wrote that there would have a cause that would make killing worth the while. Says Stuart Chase wrote, "A better economic order is worth a little bloodshed." Lord Esher, Esher, a powerful member of the Rhodes Round Table, sought shedding Americans' blood at the first possible moment. If many lives have to be sacrificed, the influence upon the American people can only be beneficial. These are parasites, folks. That's what these people are. Bertrand Russell, whichever one you want to pronounce it, suggested a black death should be disseminated throughout the world once every generation to control population growth. The statement Dr. Cuddy cites demonstrates the power elite lack of concern for human suffering. This is why they're psychopaths, folks. Get that through your head. You need to have eyes to see and ears to hear. A century ago, most people knew about the Illuminati. Some lodges must still have been active in 1871 when Albert Pike wrote Morals and Dogma, because he referred to the common origin of Hermetic Freemasonry and the Illuminati when he wrote, quote, "It was the same remembrance, preserved or perhaps profaned in the celebrated Order of the Templars. That became for all the secret associations of the Rosy Cross, of the Illuminati, and of the Hermetic Freemasons the reason of their strange rites, rites, of their signs more or less conventional, and above all, of their mutual devotedness and of their power." That is from Albert Pike. Many conservatives believe that the American voters' choice of George W. Bush as president marks a return to the founding values of our republic. But it should be remembered that George W. Bush, like his father, George H.W. Bush, and his grandfather, Prescott Shelton Bush, is a member of Skull and Bones. It is the purpose of this article to show how Skull and Bones members work in tandem with Rhodes Scholars and Fabian Socialists to form an important part of what is known as the power elite. In 1833, that year, the Skull and Bones fraternity was organized at Yale University as Chapter 322 of a German fraternity. In 1883, that is 50 years later, what part had Skull and Bones played in our elections? Professor Carroll Quigley was President Clinton's mentor, and in Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, Professor revealed that William C. Whitney, Whitney, a Skull and Bones member, and others, in the late 19th century developed a plan to control both major political parties through financial contributions and have the two main parties alternate powers so the public would think it had a chance or a choice. Professor Quigley said Whitney's plan lasted about 16 years, and after that, the Eastern establishment, that is the power elite, moved the Democrat and Republican presidential candidates towards the political center. In other words, there's no damn bit of difference between the two of them. It's just a different slogan. Quote, the assiduous fostering the process behind the scenes and nearly met in the center with almost identical candidates and platforms, although the process was concealed as much as possible by the revival of meaningless war cries and slogans. Elsewhere, Professor Quigley commented the two parties should be almost identical so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. Of course not. Professor Quigley was allowed to examine some of the secret records of the power elite and found that in the late 19th century, Cecil Rhodes had formed a secret society to take the government of the whole world. In 1883 through 84, the British Fabian Socialist Society was organized by George Bernard Shaw. That's right. Many of you people quote this guy as though he's some great fucking hero. Seriously, you think this guy is super great. He's part of this. H.G. Wells, Sidney Webb, Annie Besant, and others. In fact, Bertrand Russell joined the organization sometimes later. This particular individual here was in England in the early 1900s. And we're going to go into his book sometime in the near future. And he knew some of these people. We'll see what he thinks about them. He's American, folks, by the way. Cecil John Rhodes organized a secret society to take control of the world. His mentor at Oxford University was John Ruskin, R-U-S-K-I-N. Ruskin has a swastika engraved on his gravestone, just as Rhodes Trust member Rudolph Kipling has on the covers of his earlier books. Prior to Adolf Hitler, the swastika, which reportedly also had been seen at S&B vaults at his Skull and Bones vault at Yale University, was a elitist symbol. It is apparently a contradiction. John Ruskin referred to himself as a Tory and a communist. So he was a part of the political party, but yet he was also a communist. However, one must realize that the elite have no quorums about working with both the political left and the political right, with the ultimate goal of synthesizing them into a world socialist government. As far as Rhodes was concerned, this plan would be carried out via the Rhodes Scholars and roundtable groups, which grew out of the secret society of the elect. Rhodes' secret society lasted almost 6 decades, by which time enough of his people had penetrated the areas of politics, economics, journalism, and education so that his conspiracy was replaced by a network of the power elite. We know that the conspiracy lasted well into the 20th century because in 1931, one of the key operatives, historian Arnold Honaby, wrote, quote, "We are at present working discreetly with our might to wrest this mysterious force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local nation state of the world. All the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with with our hands." The third group comprising the power elite would be the Fabian Socialists, which included H.G. Wells. In his book, New World for Old, Wells explains what he called a plot whereby heads of state would come and go, but bureaucrats trained in the London School of Economics, which was established by the Fabian Socialists, would remain in government making rules and regulations rather than the goals of the Fabian Society. Do you see it? Do you see it, folks? While the Fabians were using education to move the public towards socialism, Rhodes scholars were attaining important posts in universities, and Karl Haskell, that is a Rhodes scholar, was helping to establish socialist Sunday schools for young people. About the same time, socialist, that is John Dewey, who has been mentored by G. Stanford Hall, who was brought to Johns Hopkins University by his president, Daniel Colt Gilman, was instituting progressive education in classrooms across our nation. And like the Rhodes Scholars' influence in journalism, economics, and politics. Skull and Bones members also became involved in these areas in journalism. Richard Eli Danielson would become the publisher of the Atlantic Monthly. Russell Wheeler Davenport would become the editor of Fortune magazine, and Henry Luce, L-U-C-E, would become the founder of Time. Early on, young Henry Luce learned that a powerful circles of contacts and friends could move the world. In economics, the Skull and Bones member with Thomas Daniels would found the Archer Daniel Midland, ADM, a transnational corporation. Today, ADM controls most of the world's grain. You hear that? There are only 5 companies, actually, there are only 5 corporations in the whole world that actually control all the grain, folks. Are you going to look and see, or are you just going to continue to do this? Close your ears and pretend nothing's going to happen. 1908, William Howard Taft, who was a Skull and Bones member, was elected president, replacing Theodore Roosevelt, who served until March 1909. 4 years later, in a 3-way race that was remarkably similar to the presidential contest of the 1992, where S&B member George Bush lost his big bid for re-election to Rhodes Scholar Bill Clinton. Taft lost his bid for re-election to Woodrow Wilson. President Woodrow Wilson's chief advisor was Colonel Edward Mandell House, who wrote a book entitled Philip Drew. We need to read that book, folks. Philip Drew, Administrator, in which he alluded to the creation of a socialism as dreamed of by Dr. Karl Marx. Dr. Karl Marx, I should say. You have no idea what has been going on for the last 150 years. We've all been asleep, so let's just wake up now. 1917, Lord Esher was one of the 4 original members of Cecil Rhodes' secret society. By 1917, England was involved in World War I, and he was an advisor to the English king. On August 11th, Lord Esher wrote in his diary, quote, Mr. Henry Morgenthau asked me to call on him. He was one of the principal supporters of President Wilson in the campaign for the presidency, and he possessed the friendship and confidence of the president. They are ready to sacrifice the lives of American citizens. Mr. Morgenthau realized the importance upon the morale of the French army and the French people of cementing the alliance by shedding American blood at the earliest possible moment. If many lives here have to be sacrificed, the influence upon the American people can only be beneficial. They don't care, folks. They don't care a damn. They don't give a damn about you. These are parasites. These are psychopaths, sick people. 1919, after World War ended, members of Cecil Rhodes' Round Table Group, largely under the direction of Rhodes' successor, Lord Alfred Milner, met. They got to put this name in front of them also in Britain. I don't know what the hell is wrong with people there. Everybody's going to be called a lord. That tells you them already that basically they see themselves as above everybody else. They're psychopaths. Met with the inquiry led by Colonel Edward Mandell House. Working with the Fabian Socialists, they established the Royal Institute of International Affairs and its American branch, the Council on Foreign Relations. The CFR was largely under control of the Socialists of J.P. Morgan, some of whom were Skull and Bone members such as Henry P. Davison and Avery Harriman. Avery Harriman's brother, E. Roland Harriman, was a member of CFR. He was initiated into Skull and Bones in 1917, along with Prescott Shelton Bush. That's right, George W. Bush's grandfather. In 1921, the CFR was incorporated in the state of New York. Do you hear that? The Council of Foreign Relations was incorporated in the state of New York. It's a corporation. Wouldn't know that, would you? By the way, one of the largest, when I used to take the journal CFR, Council for Foreign Relations magazine called Foreign Affairs, one of its biggest sponsors was Archer Daniel Midland. It was a quarterly magazine or journal, whatever you want to call it, and it was one of the biggest. It was one of the biggest advertisers for it. They usually had a 2-page article, a 2-page deal, like advertising about their company. Continued 1928, H.G. Wells authored The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for the World Revolution. By then, he had broken with the Fabians, not in terms of their goals, but only in believing that they should be open about their plan to synthesize Western capitalism with Eastern communism and create a world socialist government. In a later book titled The New World Order, Wells said that many would die protesting against it. In the same year as The Open Conspiracy was published, H.G. Wells received a letter from Bertrand Russell congratulating him and saying, quote, Lord R.B. Handon, Haldann, Fabian socialists would not forego the pleasure to be derived from the next war. They love death. They love it so much, don't they? That's why they're involved in all the defense companies. They have stock in it or whatever. They make money off of it. Bertrand Russell would later write that the Black Death or bacteriological warfare might be needed to halt the population. Wells had already written that they would have a cause that would make killing worth the while. They don't ever ask these questions on interviews or anything with television back. These guys never did. Never. They were, because the media also all in part of it too. Continue. In his book, A New Deal, future New Deal Resettlement Administration and UNESCO, consultant Stuart Chase wrote, a better economic order is worth a little bloodshed. Stuart Chase advocating joining H.G. Wells' Open Conspiracy. 1928, John Dewey wrote an article for the December 5th issue of the New Republic magazine, which he noted that the Bolsheviks were engaged in, quote unquote, this is a quote, a most interesting sociological experiment and using progressive educational ideas and practices to counteract and transform the influence of home and church. These people worship Satan, folks. That's what they worship. They hate mankind. Maybe they're not mankind either. The following year in his book called Individualism, Old and New, Dewey predicted we are in for some kind of socialism, call it by whatever name we please. You see, that's a quote. We are in for some kind of socialism, call it by whatever remains. Yes, the United States is a very much socialist country. Almost all the West is socialist. Dewey would later become president of the League for Industrial Democracy, LID, formerly the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, and the American counterpart of the British Fabian Society. The 30th anniversary report on the LID stated, the student LID feels, this is a quote, the student LID feels particularly proud that the last batch of Rhodes Scholars, containing 6 members of the LID, John Dewey and the Fabian Socialists, wanted social or group control. 1928, when William Paley, that is the CFR, was beginning CBS, his chief advisor, he bought it from RCA, by the way, he created CBS. His chief advisor was Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, who authored the book Propaganda, in which he revealed. By the way, I've done all the book. I've read the book from cover to cover. Quote, those who manipulate the organized habits and opinions of the masses constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of the world or the country, he says. On April 11, 1933, that is, Max Mason, president of the Rockefeller Foundation, assured his trustees that in their program, that is the, quote, the social sciences will concern themselves with the rationalization of social controls, the control of human behavior. So the social sciences are basically political science, sociology, psychology. 4 years later, the foundation gave a grant to Princeton University to study the influence of radio on different groups, and the Rockefeller General Education Board funding a study of CBS 1938 broadcast of War of the Worlds, which was written up later as a study in psychological panic. They got a kick out of that, folks. They got a kick out of it. 1938, Francis Pickens Miller, as a Rhodes Scholar, became organizing director of the Committee on Foreign Relations of the CFR. 2 years later, he had another group which included Dean Acheson, CFR, future CFR President Alan Dulles, CBS newsman Elmer Davis was a Rhodes Scholar also. Anne Whitney Shepperson was also a Rhodes Scholar, a former assistant to Colonel Edward Mandell House. The group came to be known as the Fight for Freedom Community. It was a front organization for the English government effort to involve the United States in World War II. The British rigged a public opinion poll and placed women with certain key American government officials. Fabian socialist columnist Walter Lippmann, brother-in-law, even came up with the idea of creating a phony Nazi map, which was given to President Roosevelt for propaganda purposes. FDR said, quote, "I have in my possession a secret map made in Germany by Hitler's government, by the planners of the New World Order." Lord Lothan was the British ambassador to the United States at that time. He was a member of the Society of the Elect, the inner circle of Cecil Rhodes' secret group. In 1939, that year, H.G. Wells revealed the socialist plan to create a world government. In his book called The New World Order, he wrote, "There will be no day of days when a new world order comes into being. Step by step, and here and there it will arrive. Even as it comes into being, it will develop fresh perspectives. Countless people will hate the new world order and will die protesting against it." Quote. Yes, that's what we're going to have to do if we're going to make any changes, folks. The last statement may well be proven true, but those who trust and follow our Lord and his word need not fear. This is, again, the perspective of a Christian. I don't know if I don't agree with these perspectives, but I'm going to read it anyway. If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for all of us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? If it is Christ who died, and furthermore is also risen, who's even at the right hand of God, and who else also make intercession for us. My point simply is, if there's such a thing as this, what they believe, with me studying church history and theology over 20 years ago, there were many Christians supposedly killed by the Roman government, literally millions. Where was Jesus on this deal? Where was God at? You see. So, and I also understand basically that Christianity, Judaism, and the Muslim faith were all created by the Jews. This is their works, you see. They worked in this deal. Concluding notes are from Mr. Dr. Monty regarding Dr. Cuddy's research here. What can we do? Edwin Burke lived at the time of the American Revolution, and many people are convinced that he founded the modern day conservative movement, he wrote. Quote, "When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle." Quote, "Our enemies are well organized. We must work together if we hope to counter them. First, we must return to the faith of our fathers, for that is the foundation of our freedom. Then we must rekindle a love for liberty in the people and convince them that life without freedom is life without meaning. We must organize our precincts and tell our neighbors about the power elite. They claim that they want to do good, but some of them have used wars, revolutions, assassinations, deceptions, and murder to advance their agenda. Can they justify what they have done? Remember the Lord's admonition." And my point simply here is, again, I'm not going to beat up on Christians because there's some good people who are actually, they're not bad people. They just are misinformed in many ways. And they don't realize what they're doing because the best thing to do, in my opinion, this is my opinion, is don't vote, don't consent. That's the peaceful way. That's the way, basically saying, we don't want you to be our lords and kings anymore. We don't want that. So we choose not to vote. We don't give our consent to your new world order. Okay. That's what I feel is strongly what needs to be done. People need to stand in that and stop being pulled and swayed, which is what all these clowns are. All of them. They're controlled opposition, folks. They are, there's people out here that gives bits and pieces of what I would call some truth, but they never give you what I call the arm and the hammer type of thing to understand what is going on. You see, and it's so simplified. Most people are not interested in truth because they've been so dumbed down. They want you to explain it to them in 5 or 10 minutes, and they're not willing to even fucking work for it. They're not willing to spend some money and start researching. You see, they want it all hand fed to them. And to be honest with you, you don't deserve freedom. You really don't. If you're not willing to see what's going on, you really don't have a fucking idea what is going on. And you're in the way. You really are. I don't mean that in a bad way, but well, yeah, I do. I'm tired of people who just simply won't do anything. They will not research. They will not dig. The computer, you can do this stuff. You can research it. You can find books online, and yet very few people even take the time to even research anything. Basically, they don't honor freedom. They're not willing to stand or even die for it. You see, you're pathetic. You know, yeah, it's harsh judgment. Um, there's only a few of us out here, folks, that are even trying to make a dent in us. And most of the people don't even want to spend 45 minutes to even do anything. They want to live in their little whatever world they want to live in because they don't want to deal with reality. That's why all this stuff about New Age movement, all this stuff that's involved is to keep you from really actually seeing the real truth. Because this is all it started out, folks. All this stuff, all of it, Manivalowski, all this stuff has been done to continue to confuse people, you see. And so few are willing to actually pursue this. If you don't think freedom's important, that's fine. You won't be around, or you'll be put in jail, and you won't see the light of day, probably. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just telling you that's what they do. Their handprint has been all over Soviet Union, folks. Their handprint's been all over China, communist China. They've killed millions upon millions and millions of people in the past. You think they'd stop now? Are you dreaming? I mean, I have people telling me they just don't seem to understand any of this. They don't understand the importance of being free, having individual rights, not human rights, but individual rights and individual freedom. People are not willing to think anymore because they've been programmed. That's the truth. They've been programmed to listen to something that's on the radio or internet, like Alex Jones or all these other clowns. Frankly, I don't even keep up with. They're not important. Massive changes is coming to this country, folks, and it's going to change. It's going to be completely different than what you think it's going to be. The handwriting's all over the place, and you're not even aware of what's going on. You make me sick, most of you, because you won't even read. You won't even discern. You won't pick up the ball and run with it. You don't. It's really sad. I've done probably in the last 2 to 3 years expounding as much truth as I know, and digging and digging and digging to share with people. And very few people really even they don't read it. It's too long. It's too long. I can't handle it. Well, you're going to handle it soon. It's going to be a different world, folks. It's going to be a different world. It's going to be a very dark world. This is their dream. Their dream is to have complete control over you in a world government. That you will be dependent upon them in every way. Food on the table, whatever you want to call it. They'll control you by that way. And It's a sad story. Humans don't seem to learn much, do they? They don't seem to want to ever, freedom isn't free, folks. It just isn't. And I'm saying simply, it's even my own government. That is even when the whole thing started out, folks. There was already some rotten apples already involved. It didn't take long for it to start getting really bad. And 50 years have changed. It all changed within the country. So have a good day. Have a good night, wherever you're at. You take care. Good night.